Okay, welcome everybody to this KIC seminar, and I'm delighted to welcome Yuveena Gopalan, who is presenting the first year of her PhD, her stage 2, year 2 presentation on researchers' perceptions on becoming a better researcher. And I'm also delighted to welcome Helen de Berg-Woodman, who is the Dean of our Graduate Research School, who will be the external reviewer today. So, Yuveena, over to you. Look forward to hearing how your work has been going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Welcome everyone to my year 2 seminar. My current study is focused on understanding researchers' perception on becoming a better researcher. Which can help inform the kind of supports that we can develop for the researchers. So we currently have some understanding on how professionals actually learn. We have some understanding of institutional strategies and those kind of strategies that can inform the kind of training and support that is available. An area that is noted to be lacking is on the perspectives of academics themselves, on how they approach their learning. So therefore, by understanding researchers' perspectives, we could facilitate better alignment between the top-down institutional strategies and approaches in furthering the development of academics' growth. So this brings us to the question of how do academics actually approach their own development and growth, which connects to my study's first research question, which has two focuses. The first focus is in trying to understand how successful researchers actually develop through their own experiences. When the second focus is trying to use that information to support other researchers. First, let's take a look at how professionals learn and the literature on academic perspectives that's available. So professionals learn largely through informal means. They engage in need-based and practice-based learning by taking on workplace activities and tasks. A large aspect of their learning is social in nature through peer engagements. So professionals learn by being part of a community of practice. Individuals are connected by shared interests, common goals, and concerns. They share knowledge, they exchange knowledge, practices, and they also support each other. So professionals participate in these communities as beginners through starting at peripherals and then moving on to the center of the community by being experts themselves. Here we look at two studies on researchers' perspectives. The first is on Brill's conception of research. So there are 4 conceptions that was engendered by Brill's study. The first is domino, which is looking at how researchers take on doing research, so the process of doing research itself. Trading is in the process of researchers using publication or research outputs as a form of recognition and monitoring. And layer is uncovering and linking meaning between those research that they're doing by leveraging on other researchers' perspective. And journey is looking at the underlying questions posed. This is more of a transformative type of conception, where the research itself creates a transformative growth in that researcher's career and life. So the next one we're looking at is academics, ways in which academics perceive their own growth and development. There are also 4 themes that was generated in academic study. The first one is on being competent. That is, researchers they know that they're on the right track. This has a clear research focus that they're developing research topics well, they're able to publish in that area. The second is looking at becoming recognized. So this is similar to the trading conception in group, where researchers use and leverage their research outputs in terms of being part of a community and being recognized. And then there's becoming more productive. where there is more of a quantitative focus on the research outputs, where researchers focus on generating more projects, having more PhD students, applying and receiving more funding. And lastly is becoming more sophisticated, where there's a shift towards qualitative type of focus, where researchers are focused on the wider societal benefits and impact that their research actually produces. Both Brew and Atkins' findings are indicative of a researcher's career progression, and we can see that there's progression moving from external focus on quantity towards a more quality focus towards wider societal impact. We'll be revisiting this later in the findings section. So we come back to our research question on understanding how researchers actually develop. Therefore, to answer the first part of the research question, we have structured our study to focus on understanding how successful researchers at different career stages talk about their own learning and development. To gain understanding on this, a semi-structured interview was designed within 3 areas. We asked researchers on how they were learning and progressing through their careers, how did they adapt to external conditions, and the type of experience and advice that they might have that could help other researchers, things like missed opportunities or something that they may have found helpful to have known a bit earlier. So 24 researchers were interviewed, and 12 from each field, learning analytics and higher education and assessment, at 3 career stages, early career and senior career researchers, with also consideration for gender. So the data was acquired from Scopus, from Researcher Discovery tab, where the terms learning analytics and higher education and assessment was used to gain the highest matching documents within the last 3 years. So from this, an initial short list of 200 researchers were received from the Scopus. And from that 200 list of researchers, the career stages, the information on career stage was obtained from publicly available sources. And from that, a final shortlist of 12 researchers was selected from each field, and they were approached for interview. You will see these in the codes that will come in the findings section. So I just wanted to explain a little bit what you will be seeing. So the first 2 alphabets there, HE and LA, indicates the field of research, higher education and assessment, and learning analytics. ECR, MCR, and SCR will note their career stage, early, mid, and senior. And F and M is just female and male, and 1 and 2 is the researcher number 1 and researcher number 2. So the coding, so we followed an inductive, reflective, thematic analysis approach for the coding methodology. And since the research in the area is limited, adoption of an inductive approach was seen as suitable, as it allows for construction of themes being informed by the interview rather than being restricted to predefined themes or conceptions. So we follow the 6 phase of reflexive thematic analysis process. The first phase is data familiarization. This is really understanding the transfer, re-reviewing the video, and going through the transcription process. And from that, the data was coded. And in this process of coding of the data, followed the approach from Srivastava and Hopu in creating meaning making and sense making of the interview materials, which is asking the question of what is the researcher trying to tell me, what am I trying to uncover, and what is the relationship between the two. And from the coding that was created, initial themes were generated. So codes that were similar and they were giving similar kind of narratives were put together. And themes were reviewed and further refined and defined as well. And to the production of the report. So I do want to emphasize that this is not a linear process. this is quite an iterative process. So from the analysis, 4 themes were engendered in ways in which researchers approach, respond to, and talk about their own development. So the first theme, establishing expertise, relates mainly to knowledge. Pursuing passion is on the motivation of the researchers themselves on undertaking the research. Coping with challenge and change signifies the researcher's disposition and their approach. Building belonging, really looking at the support structure that's available for them or they have created. So we'll be going through each one of the themes. So the first one, establishing expertise, is on the ways in which researchers develop their expertise and establish themselves as a researcher. So underneath this theme, there is 4 sub-themes, and we'll be looking at each one individually. So the first one, learning through social engagement, is really there's a huge social aspect to learning here, where researchers work with other researchers in terms of leveraging their skills and understanding and broadening their perspectives. They leverage their peers' skills in co-creating research, and they do this by putting themselves in social engagement type of events. They visit institutions, and they also engage peers and find mentors. So some quotes on researchers engaging with other researchers is on shaping their ideas. Researchers gain understanding on the extent of how good or developed the ideas are. They engage other researchers to broaden their perspectives. So the awareness of different contexts can bring new meaning to the problem or research area that they are currently working on. And they also engage peers and experts to emulate them and learn from their advanced knowledge and skills. This sub-theme similarly has a focus on researchers gaining and building their knowledge. However, this process is undertaken individually through mainly informal practices in their workplace. So similar to that, researchers also engage in gaining fluency. They acquire and keep current knowledge of the research landscape, including the methodologies and how to apply them. This includes peripheral, interdisciplinary, and bordering areas to discover scope to further expand and communicate research. The process of developing knowledge requires an understanding of where a researcher is in their journey. Therefore, researchers self-introspect. They identify areas that they have proficiency, so they are able to leverage on those skills and knowledge, and areas that they would benefit from developing, from gaining further development. Therefore, researchers self-reflect on their strengths and benchmark against their past self as a way to observe and reflect that they're improving and learning. So you can see from the examples here that researchers are talking about first focusing on their own strengths and then reflecting on whether they've done actually better than the previous years. Part of developing expertise is in building visibility to be known and contributing to the field. So researchers do this by finding a niche, by positioning themselves as as experts, take on leadership type activities, and focus on producing research outputs and impact. Therefore, researchers need to be self-aware and have an understanding on what their unique contributions are and what sets them apart from other researchers and the way that they can position themselves and build visibility in the community. So the example here is the first scope, where researcher has decided to position themselves in both quant and qual, so that they can increase their visibility as an expert in that area. And the second quote, the researcher is focused on gaining knowledge in an area and also taking leadership roles, because that would help position themselves as an expert. So the second theme is on pursuing passion. This is on how researchers understand their own passions and motivation, which then lends itself on the kind of tasks and activities that they take on, the type of the kind of time that they spend on taking on those different tasks. So there are two main sub-themes under pursuing passion. The first one is really researchers understanding where their personal interests, motivation, and goals are. Researchers are seen to use language here such as being excited, passionate, enjoy, feels right, being proud, and motivation. So being passionate signifies high levels of personal agency, which pushes them to build themselves in the area that they're interested in. So part of the approach in pursuing their passion is being selective in the kind of activities that researchers take on that add value and that's aligned with their goals. So researchers speak about the ability in saying no as much as saying yes, and on defending their time to do research, since most research is done from using their personal time. So researchers acknowledge that this type of awareness comes from experience. However, having a good understanding on the kind of activities that they're taking on would give them the information on areas that they could prioritize and deprioritize. The next theme is on coping with challenge and change. So this is really looking at how researchers adapt and respond to the environmental changes, difficult situation, things that needs them to be flexible. So there are four sub-themes underneath this, and the first one is resilience in the face of opposition. This is really focused on researchers being persistent and continuing even though if they experience any difficulties or pushback, and also pushing their own boundaries and comfort. So example here from a researcher who received criticism in changing their field of study. They acknowledged that this was a difficult period. They said that it knocked their confidence. However, they still went ahead and made that change because they knew that that was the right thing for them. With the second example here is on being resourceful, where a researcher found themselves in an environment where they did not have resources to get PhD students. So they worked on collaborating with another colleague to be able to connect with that colleague and then get PhD students that way. So being resourceful and finding out ways to solve problems that work for them. So the next is coping with rejection, and this is really focused on researchers reframing rejections or non-successes, specifically on funding, publications, and collaborations. So the first code here that we will look at is where researchers speak about reframing and normalizing rejections as non-successes, as this is part of research. All researchers noted that it was difficult. However, over time, they start to look at rejections or even feedbacks as a form of learning. So part of developing as a researcher is taking on a flexible approach with one's career directions and plans. This relates to reinventing themselves in terms of moving to a new country, taking on a new skill, or even moving fields. With the first code here, the researcher notes advice that they received from the supervisor that moving to a different institution or country could help in their growth. So, because that would then help perceive them to be seen as somebody that has more experience. So the example here is really when the researcher finished their study as a PhD student, they were then, they took their advice of the supervisor to move to another country, and when they came back, they were seen as somebody who had more experience and expert in that area. For the second code, this is a strategy moved by another researcher, where they looked at positioning themselves in an area that was would help them stand out. So they were currently in an area where they said higher ed is like an ocean, and they were looking for a lake or a pond, and country one is that. So they found a different another location where they could position themselves better as an expert. Researchers also noted the importance of workplace to recognize and be supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion. researchers spoke about being in a position of privilege, that some had that support, that they were able to continue their career by being privileged, but they recognize that others don't have that affordance. And researchers also spoke about those that had caregiving duties, that it would be difficult for them to take on the kind of being persistent and coping with challenges that other researchers could. And also noted the kind of advice that they may get from, so the second quote is example of the kind of advice that a researcher noted that they received from a female academic rather from a male academic. The last theme is on building belonging. So this theme is really looking at the kind of support that is derived and generated from their environment. So earlier on we looked at coping with challenges and changes. So this theme really leverages, that earlier theme really leverages on building belonging, because the immediate environment which is supportive really would provide the right structure for researchers to be able to grow and develop. So there are three sub-themes underneath this: personal support, community support, and peer support in growing professionally. The first one is looking at personal support itself. So researchers express the importance of taking care of their own well-being, since career development is a long-term process, and that there is importance to focus on their balance and developing resiliency. The next is on community support. This is where researchers really leverage the community they're in, building relationships, and even reciprocal type relationships, and maintaining those kind of relationships. So researchers seek to build relationships with like-minded researchers. Here, the first quote is talking about finding your academic capacity. So where addition of two researchers creates something transformative. So researchers find other researchers who they work well with and that they appreciate their work. With researchers also leverage their peers on getting advice on things that do not work and connect with other researchers to further their work. And on their approach, they also mentioned that it's important to have a reciprocal approach, make it a two-way relationship that you're gaining from each other. That way, that relationship is long-lasting and both researchers would benefit. And the final one is on peer support and growing professionally. So this is specifically the type of getting support in terms of professional growth from the community and peers. This also is on researchers leveraging on mentorship and experts' advice. So example here is advice from supervisors to think of potential career paths for these researchers, as there were not many options for the researcher in that space. So they were given advice to think about moving into a different space, and their supervisor also helped them to reach out to the network to see if there's any potential for them to find work in that area. The second quote is on leveraging immediate seniors as potential in scaffolding learning. So this researcher notes that sometimes it could be a bit daunting to find and speak with experts or mentors who are really in senior positions. So one way of learning is to scaffold that learning by engaging with immediate seniors that could reduce when asking more naive kind of perceived questions. From this study, we found that there is alignment with workplace learning theories, where learning is informal. There is a social aspect to learning. Learning is quite practice and need-based. Researchers do put emphasis on their motivation and their interest in taking on those different tasks and activities. It is important that they're adaptable and be flexible because plans can change. And that is a huge underpinning of social support that is important in the development and growth. Points of similarities were observed with both group and academic study, especially in establishing expertise in pursuing passion themes. So we have confirmatory evidence on how important these are to research development. These areas of similarities are seen mostly where the focus is on engaging with activities that further research and follow on own interests and goals. So you can see a lot of overlap, mostly within establishing expertise, as this is a form of researchers really taking on different activities of doing research and leveraging those outputs to connect with other researchers. A little bit is seen on pursuing passion, especially on recognizing interest, because that relates mostly to journey and sophistication, being sophisticated, as that underpins how researchers being aware of the areas that they're actually undertaking those developments in. So the value from this research is with the areas of difference, with the themes coping with challenge and change and building belonging. By showing social connections as points in building a supportive network and environment by the researcher, we believe the points of difference could be due to the way the questions were structured in this interview. Because in our interview questions, we were also focused not only how researchers were undertaking their research, we were focused on asking them questions on the support and the kind of barriers that they faced throughout their development. So for the next steps, the first part will be reviewing the codes and refining the themes with a full set of interview data. And as it would be useful to have the inputs from other researchers as well in framing those themes. And next would be analyzing the full data with the view of field, if there's any differences between fields, career stages, and gender. We also believe that our work will have implications on research and development strategies. We plan to connect the learning needs from researchers, which we have uncovered from the interviews within those themes, on how they have actually progressed in their development so far, and then to link those with the kind of development supports that they've received. So researchers also spoke about the supports that they received throughout their career so far, including specific questions on training and institutional approaches. So we can include insights on training and institutional approaches that researchers found useful. They found that they could benefit more from. And also tools and resources that they think that would be supportive to their development. So, and then linking both the learning needs and the development needs from the perspective of researcher to what's available within the institute, as in to linking that to the capability frameworks. So this leads us back to research question 1 on the first part. And through the understanding of how successful researchers actually perceive their development, by having that information and linking that information back to the capability frameworks, we would then lend to research question 2 on how we can then translate that information into developing requirements for researcher professional learning support. So to do this, the outcomes of the study would be presented to the research office, and also workshops would be facilitated in gaining views of both top-down and bottom-up views, so from the institution perspective and also with a wider research population on what they think from the outcomes of this study in identifying potential areas of support. So therefore, bringing our knowledge of existing theories on understanding professional learning and institutional strategies, by being informed through academic perspectives, so we can find ways to better support our researchers in becoming better researchers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Yuveena.